During World War II, Adolf Hitler used propaganda and persuasive speaking to indoctrinate the German government Nazi Party into anti-Semitism during the 1930s and 40s, resulting in the deaths of millions of people of the Jewish faith. With the aid of Adolf Hitler, the National Socialist Physicians League redefined race in the 1930s by associating Judaism with certain physical characteristics different to those of the Aryan race. The Aryan race was Germans who had blue eyes and blonde hair, and who would be recognized as superior over any other race. Hitler surreptitiously created concentration camps, which were known as re-education camps to the outer world, so that the Jewish population would learn new skills behind the electric fences of Auschwitz and at least 750 known camps around Europe. Inside these concentration camps, Jewish people were beaten, enslaved to build their own shelter through forced labor, and separated from their families. For a select group of people, mainly women, twins, people with deformities, and homosexuals, their captivity in the concentration camps did not consist of laboring, but instead they were treated like lab rats. These thousands of people were used in medical research to test deranged theories, which was painful, dangerous, unsanitary, and inhumane. There were 70 known medical concentration camps in Germany that tortured 7,000 people. The people who were used in medical experimentation had their basic rights violated, and to this day, there is still controversy whether or not to use the research.
The Nazis who ran the medical experimentations used the motto, "Life unworthy of life." There were several types of experiments performed on the Jewish people that were inhumane. They fall into three categories: racial experiments, war and injury-related experiments, and pharmaceutical testing of drugs and experimental procedures. Sterilization was one of the major experiments performed on the Jewish population. This was done to prevent the production of children that were not of the superior race. At Auschwitz, 2 or 3 times a week, groups of 30 prisoners were brought into physician Dr. Horst Schumann's laboratory. There he would destroy the reproductive systems of males and females using various methods. The Jews were forced to return to work directly after the procedures, even if they had severe swelling and burns from the procedures. Dr. Joseph Mengele took a different approach to the experiments by using kindergarten-aged Jews as test subjects. Eventually his interest changed to twins, dwarfs, and people with abnormalities. Prints of the subjects' hands, feet, jaws, and teeth were all stored with Mengele's files that should arguably remain unopened. Freezing experiments were conducted to attempt to find a cure for hypothermia. They were performed by freezing people and warming them up. Along with this war-related experiment, drinking seawater, putting people at high altitudes, and other experiments were done to figure out how life could be sustained for the Nazis in extreme environments. The doctors would also break and amputate inmates' bones or calf muscles to try to create transplants. In several other concentration camps, drugs were tested for diseases such as malaria, typhus, tuberculosis, typhoid, yellow fever, and hepatitis. Sulfa drugs were used at the Ravensbrück camp, along with gas poisoning to test antidotes. After any experiment was performed, the subjects were killed by lethal injection and their organs were collected for other tests. After the Holocaust, the doctors who performed non-therapeutic and useless research were condemned in the Nuremberg trials. The trials were held in Nuremberg, Germany in 1946. The scientists were charged with war crimes and crimes against humanity. As a result of these trials, 7 scientists were hanged, 7 were imprisoned for 10 to 20 years, and 7 were acquitted and freed. The case made against them condemned them for disobeying the Hippocratic Oath by maltreating the patients in the concentration camps. The Hippocratic Oath, originating from ancient Greece, is an oath taken by all doctors saying that they will only help their patients and never try to harm them. As a result of these trials, a new set of rules for human experimentation was created to preserve the rights of the subjects. The code states as follows: the voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. The experiment should be such as to yield fruitful results for the good of society, unprocurable by other methods or means of study, and not random and unnecessary in nature, such as the medical experimentation done in concentration camps. The experiment should be so designed and based on the results of human experimentation and knowledge of natural history of the disease or other problem under study, that the anticipated results will justify the performance of the experiment. The experiment should be so conducted to avoid all unnecessary physical and mental suffering and injury. During the course of the experiment, the human subject should be at liberty to end the experiment if he has reached the physical or mental state where continuation of the experiment seems to him to be impossible.
In the Nuremberg trial, the defendants argued that it was ethical and necessary to proceed with the horrific medical experimentation for the good of their country. They argued that research is necessary in times of war and in times of national emergency because military and civilian survival may rely on the human and medical experimentation. Extreme circumstances demand extreme action.
In defense, General Telford, as prosecutor, said, "These experiments revealed nothing which civilized medicine can use." In addition, though the experimentation having to do with war injuries may have been beneficial at the time, it should have been tested on animals before immediately experimenting on humans. Regardless of how useful the experiments were, they confiscated the dignity of the Jewish captives.
The prisoners utilized for human experimentation were already condemned to death. The defendants said that the medical experimentation was a good thing for the captives because they would live longer.
The captives were forced to be subjects in experiments without painkillers. The experiments did not benefit them by any means, but instead prolonged their misery.
Experimental subjects were selected by the military, leaders, or prisoners themselves, so the doctors cannot be blamed since they were picked by someone else. An individual physician thus cannot be held responsible for the selections.
In defense, regardless of who chose the people, the doctors were the ones who performed the experiments.
In times of war, all members of society must contribute to the war effort. This includes the military, civilians, and those who are incarcerated.
If the country was truly fighting for their lives and the others of the country, why would the citizens be tortured and killed in order to somehow solve their problem?
The German physicians involved in human experimentation were only following the German law.
Though one should remain faithful to their country, they should never agree to kill off an entire community of people. Besides, killing the citizens of one's country is not a display of loyalty, it is the exact opposite.
If the physicians did not participate in the research, they would be putting their own lives at risk and might be killed. Furthermore, if the physicians did not carry out the medical experiments themselves, less experiments medical technicians would perform surgery and medical tests, causing even greater harm.
The physicians still agreed to perform the experiments. Even if the experiments did happen, without them, at least they would not have been part of the cause of the massacre. Plus, the ultimate result of all these experiments was death. Employing less qualified physicians would not have made the situation of the captives any better.
The state determined the necessity for human experimentation. The physicians were just following orders.
This was never an order. The doctors signed up voluntarily for it. The National Socialist Physicians' League was formed to purify the German medical community.
The prisoners' extent of participation in the experiment was tacit.
There was never a valid consent amongst the captives to have the experiments performed. Who would consent themselves to be tortured and killed?
Without human experimentation, there would be no way to advance the process of science and medicine.
Science and medicine are used to aid the health of people. When this goal is out of sight, the research can no longer be considered as serving medical purpose. Human experimentation should be performed on the animals first in order to show that the results have a high potential of achieving scientific knowledge.
Overall, the only positive aspect of the human medical experimentation in the Holocaust was that the experiments forced us to confront the outer limits of permissible research and to establish rules. The results of these experiments have mostly been destroyed during the fall of the Nazi Party, though the remains raise many ethical questions such as, should we use medical research results found in human experimentation? Though the results of the experiments could contain answers to medical questions, it is only right to honor those who had to suffer, and also to not share their medical results. After all, the Nuremberg trial was held to prosecute those who violated human rights. Why should the medical field today have the authority to take away the Jewish people's dignity by exposing their medical results? As one of the medical experimentation survivors once said, a human is meant more than to merely eat and breathe. It is meant having an identity, relationships with others, ties to a past, and a future, and a sense of decency and dignity.